Well, good morning, everyone. Hope we're all having a lovely day. Now, I had a great idea of something I want to talk about with Guild Wars. Since we started this whole tier list thing, do you know what I thought might be really fun to assess? And several of you guys asked me to do this for, like, just open world maps, but I kind of want to do a slightly different take on it. I want to look at just what was the best release over the years. Kind of figure out where I would rank things. So, obviously, there's been a huge amount of them. So, for this video, I want to look at the most interesting of all the seasons, I think, at this point, and that's Season 1. Why do I say that's the most interesting? Well, because Season 1 we can't play anymore. It was content rolling out in 2012 a tiny bit, and 13, and then it's been gone, really, ever since then. Like, there were probably a lot of people watching this video who never even played any of those. So I'm going to remind myself, sort of look back, see where I'm settled for every single one of the big Season 1 patches. Now, Season 1's quite special in a lot of ways. One of them is that the patch cycle, the amount of time you had to wait for the next release, was very, very small. So there were actually a lot of releases. And then the other thing was that they were removing the patches basically as soon as they came in. So it was like either it was fear of missing out, make sure you've got the game installed. These days, that's why it's all completely unplayable. There's a bit of a replacement patch, which I do have a little box on the tier list for us to look at. So yeah, let's run through. I'm going to try and do it in chronological order as best I can remember. I've set up the tier list here just before recording to have every release. So without further ado, I mean, let's jump in. So it all begins with the Lost Shores. Now, it's quite interesting. This patch technically wasn't called Living World at the time. Living World, as far as I remember, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but as far as I remember, Living World was only a term that was coined and pushed on the patches after Christmas, of that first Christmas in 2012. But the Lost Shores actually predates that. This was the first big patch of the game altogether. It introduced South Sun Cove. It had the whole big assault thing with the meta event that was happening in Lion's Arch, where you could fight the Karka, which was a whole new enemy variety they added. And in fact, there were like multiple forms of Karka they'd done too. So, all speaking, in all honesty, I think it was a reasonable quality release. A new open world map, and like lots of new art and animations and things to see. But I got to be honest with you guys, I actually rate this very low. I don't even think of it as Living World, really, but I rate it very low because I consider it the first misstep in story delivery as far as Living World is concerned. They basically invented a new island in lore that they dumped in the middle of the Sea of Sorrows that had no supporting information about it at all whatsoever. It was just a sideshow, really. When I look back at these early moments in Guild Wars 2, I kind of wish that we'd immediately been still dealing with the Pact, and they'd immediately started talking about the next Elder Dragon that the Pact wanted to fight, and we were still dealing with Trahearne, and we were still dealing with Fort Trinity, and you know, they actually kind of progressed what they'd set up. So I think it was a bit of a misstep. I think maybe ArenaNet was just really excited to see how quickly they could turn a patch around or something. And obviously that's forgivable, as it was their very first release, and it did come fairly quickly after launch. The reason it loses even more points, though, is it was also the Fractals of the Mists patch. Now look, don't get me wrong, I like fractals at this point, but there was a thing happening with Guild Wars where basically exotic gear was far easier to get than the studio had anticipated. So they realized if there was going to be any sense of like gear and things to go for, there had to be something else. So they invented this idea of ascended gear, and that ran very contrary to all of the news they'd been talking about Guild Wars 2 before launch. They'd been promising there'd be no gear treadmill and so on. There were a lot of people cynical about MMOs that were taking a chance on Guild Wars 2 at that point. You know, there was Guild Wars 1 before it, but it was always kind of a smaller community. Guild Wars 2 blew up with jaded MMO vets that weren't looking for gear treadmills, and then so quickly they added fractals with like a confusing agony system that looked like a gear treadmill, as well as ascended gear which looked like a gear treadmill. People thought they were breaking promises, and this was actually a really controversial patch that damaged the popularity of the game and the people that were playing it. So I'm not really a fan of the Lost Shores, to be honest. Even now, when I think about like South Sun, there are some pretty areas like the hot springs and stuff, don't get me wrong. But I think I'm going to actually start off at D. And we'll adjust it later if we like, but really not a fan with their early decisions. Next, we move into Flame and Frost. So there were 2 Flame and Frost patches. So one thing to understand about Season 1, for those of you guys that missed it, is they kind of like doubled the releases. You'd get like a patch, which is like the first half of the story and like introduces a thing, and then a second patch, which concludes a thing. So they usually come in pairs. The first half of the pair here, Flame and Frost the Raising. So this is a really interesting patch that did some stuff Guild Wars 1 did, that was much loved. In the original game, they had this series of patches going out called the Warring Crater, and what they were doing was sneakily updating stuff around the world that people noticed and like strung together clues, and then eventually it manifested into big content. And they kind of tried that here as well, like random bodies appearing and vents exploding in the Shiver Peaks, and refugee camps started appearing and dynamically growing. Like, this actually is an expression of actual living world, an actually growing game. Which is interesting, but mostly when the actual big release came out, The Raising itself, it was a huge disappointment. The first like minor patch was just fixing signs, and then a little bit later they did add some instances like with a hatchery and they added Cragstead, the village in the north of the Wayfarer Foothills, but these aren't very fun. And even recently in the Icebrood Saga, when they made these things replayable, you can see there's just not much quality there. So I view the Flame and Frost as a bit of a misstep as well, as far as Season 1 was concerned. Don't worry, guys, they're not all terrible releases. They're not all low in my estimation. So I'm going to put The Raising at C. To be honest, it might even be fair to jostle with D. I'll point out at this point as well, there was Winter's Day and there were Halloween patches, and those were incredible. Not technically Living World Season 1 though, so they're not on the tier list. Okay, next we've got Flame and Frost Retribution, the second half. Now this patch, and if I remember, this was split out into like various phases. Now this to me was a fantastic release. This was a dungeon coming in. They didn't quite package it in the right way to make it clear that a dungeon was coming in. But the Molten Facility, I think, is fun to play, and every time I'm there replaying it now in the Fractals, I do credit a lot of the value I'm experiencing to Living World Season 1 itself, with the Molten Duo boss and stuff, in terms of at least the enemies. There were also some cool items you could get here. They actually started hinting at a broader story now, finally, because for now it's all been very meandering and kind of waffly. But now we have Bram in the story pretty well established, we have Rocks, so this is definitely a better patch. I'm going to put this one at B, because again, it included that dungeon, so that's the end of Flame and Frost. Then we have, I think this is the next one, Last Stand at South Sun. So this is kind of like the other half of the Lost Shores patch, but it came like way later, and now it's like formal Living World, if you will. I remember a very prominent YouTuber at the time, Don Tane, had a very big YouTube channel about Guild Wars 2, but it was around this point with the game's coverage, he got really burned and he really didn't like what they were doing. And I remember, I didn't watch many of his videos, but I remember watching him very upset about the game. And I feel like there was a general sense of discomfort in the community at this point with this release. I would say around now is when the beginning of the Guild Wars 2 doesn't have difficult endgame reputation started to appear, and people are upset that more of these patches didn't have that kind of calibrated content for them, even when they did these mini dungeons, as I've already been talking about. I think this was the early introduction to Casimir and stuff. Canuck finally becomes a character in a big way here. Ellen Keel does stuff. I actually remember myself reasonably enjoying Last Stand. Probably not more than Retribution. It's probably around B. As far as all of Living World Season 1's concerned. Next, we have Dragon Bash. So this kind of felt like a festival, but it wasn't a festival. It was like a story patch in which the content of the story is everyone celebrating the anniversary of Zaitan's death, right? I think it is when this came out. And so it kind of had those festival vibes, but it never became a repeated thing until years and years and years later, until right before or during the Icebrood Saga, I think it was. A whole bracket was, but this was a Lion's Arch thing. I remember this is really where it felt like the studio had started clicking into place what they were doing. Like they put this big song up that the studio was singing, Bash the Dragon. I feel like the press started rolling a little bit better. They started figuring out the loot and the gear and the items that you'd get. The story became more interesting with the assassination on the counselor, and Marjorie was introduced. But the thing is, it was still kind of all over the place, and we've been waiting a long time now. And instead of the game being about Elder Dragons and stuff, I felt generally a bit lost with the whole thing. There were mysteries, there were some ideas, but yeah, I'll drop it down here. This was also one of the bigger E patches, for what it's worth. This might have been when E first messaged us, which I do think will get a payoff one day. So yeah, I think Dragon Bash is about B as well. I don't really remember much about the content of the release. Just a small instance in Lion's Arch, and for that reason, I think I'm going to rate it down a little bit. Next, we have Sky Pirates of Tyria, so we're into the Aetherblade stuff now, as introduced by Dragon Bash. I think at this point, I remember there were a lot of open world metas and things, and there were zergs that you could do. They're not metas necessarily, but events that would be splashing out all over the place. Something they'd started to do with the festivals. You saw a lot of it in Season 1. I actually really quite enjoyed it at that time. I enjoyed fighting the Aetherblades as well. Now, Sky Pirates also gave us another one of these mini dungeons, the Aetherblade Retreat, which I think is one of the most beautiful places in Guild Wars 2. It's funny, guys, because I know that you've got like the Mitrin Fractal, and there are little segments of the Aetherblade Retreat that you can play in the Fractals, but there's a lot of the dungeon that's still cut out. And you can experience in fractals. What you have to do is beat the fractal and then turn around and run in the reverse direction down the path. I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but you'll see some incredibly cool places. I really like the Aetherblade retreat. I really love Mai Trin. She's actually genuinely relevant to the story right now. We know 100% because of End of Dragon, so this feels a little bit folded in a little bit more. I feel like things were really clicking in with Sky Pirates. They had all the like stuff with the the new airships that the Aetherblades have. Just the idea that there was a hidden base behind a holographic wall. The holograms themselves. There's a lot of art and fun stuff here. That's going to be the first A patch. I really did like the Sky Pirates. Next, we go to, oh, another brilliant one. Now, this one's definitely better. Bazaar of the Four Winds. Definitely, well, let's put it at S, I think, for now. One of my favorite releases from all of Season 1. It's kind of a twin release, so I'm just going to put them both up here. It was followed by Cutthroat Politics. So this introduced the Labyrinthine Cliffs and the Zephyrite and the songs about Glint. And it felt like at this patch, what had been happening with this as a story enthusiast with Guild Wars was right the way through Guild Wars 2 core. It felt like they didn't care much about Guild Wars 1 anymore, like at all, really. Like, they'd used it as a springboard, but generally they were telling new stories. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. And then it felt like in Season 1, they didn't care about the Elder Dragons anymore, and they didn't care about the characters that they'd established in the personal story anymore. I mean, the Elder Dragons were obviously always looming. It wasn't like they were moving completely away from them. But it just felt very untethered to everything. And for me, I know that ended up manifesting in this desperate desire to see Guild Wars 1 related stuff. I mean, I probably have video rants from back then in my coverage. I do have a playlist of all this. I don't know how good I was with the coverage. I'm sure I was talking about how much I missed Guild Wars 1. And then these came out, and all of the stuff with the Zephyrite and the hints about Glint. These also actually start to maybe sow the seeds for Aurene. I don't know how much the studio had been thinking about the egg already. I think the first proper hints about the egg was when the Zephyrites returned again later. But these were great patches. You also had the community vote on an upcoming Fractal, which people really rallied around. The Cliffs themselves was like one of the first big new maps we'd had in ages, since the Lost Shore. Out in the open world, and it was kind of in a special area. These were fantastic. One of my favorite parts of Season 1. Next, oh god, where do we go next? I think it's the Queen's Jubilee, isn't it? I think we go to the Queen's Jubilee. These days, when the Bazaar comes back, the Jubilee comes back at the same time. So I think it was all around the same time. Finally, at this point, we find a mysterious stranger. The first hints about Scarlet and who's been pulling the strings. Actually, I think there was a hint in Flame and Frost about a city dweller. And finally, we actually see them. Logan was back in this patch. Ritlock was back in this patch. It was just more of like this. There was a real jump up at this point. We're kind of like a weak part of Season 1. And now it actually starts to feel a bit better. I remember that duel. The boss blitz. The solo arenas with Liadri and stuff. This was a brilliant patch as well. Okay, so we got too many in S probably. Okay, what I'll do is I'll pull Cutthroat Politics down, because I do credit most of it there. And then we'll say Queen's Jubilee here. Bazaar was better than Queen's Jubilee, but this was a really good summer. I remember this. These were flowing out, and these patches were coming fast too. Next, we have Clockwork Chaos. And again, I think this one comes down a bit. This was much more about, like, the Watch Nights. Was Clockwork Chaos the release where we got to go into the nightmare version of the Crown Pavilion? Do you guys remember there was a mini mission that you could play with hunting for Farron after he tried to save Jenna? They were actually doing cutscenes and stuff at this point. I think that was this release. And I remember being really into a lot of the loot and stuff. The open world Zergs were getting a bit boring at this point. I think it was all starting to be a bit tedious to me. But we were still seeing new enemies, and there was momentum. So do I think it was better than these other ones? Yeah, probably. I think this is the right order that I've done with A. So we're basically in the second half of Living World Season 1 now. In fact, we're probably a little bit over the second half. So after Clockwork Chaos wound down, we had the Tower of Nightmares. And again, it's a double patch. You have the Tower of Nightmares, and then you have... or was this one a triple patch? It was the Nightmares Within, wasn't it? Ah, okay, I'm going to have to edit this. I made a mistake. I didn't add a box for the second half. It's okay, because they all blurred together in my mind. That's quite fitting, actually. So the Tower of Nightmares, the double patch to do with the Tower of Nightmares, really was awesome. I loved the experience of climbing that place. I loved all the stuff they did before the patch where trees started going missing in Keswick's Hills. You know, it kind of went back to a little bit of what they were doing with Flame and Frost, and people had started noticing it. I remember a Reddit thread where someone had spotted it and everyone was really captivated. And then the ultimate reveal, the damage that it did to Keswick's at the time, all the stuff about the Toxic Alliance and what they were doing things with the Nightmare Court again, and they were doing things with the Crate. And there were some really cool bosses there. You know, the Fractal is brilliant for all of its own merits, to be honest, but it does leverage the art that was made back during the Season 1 releases. And I love this thing where you'd like climb up and you'd inject the toxin thing at the top to open the chest. These were great patches. If for anyone who's watching this video and you never played Season 1 and you're sort of wondering how great it really was, if I could give you one of these things, I think I'd probably give you the Tower of Nightmares. Oh, I don't know. There's probably some better ones. Anyway, this is really good. This is definitely the top of A. It's definitely the top of A. Was it better than these two? Do you know what? I think the Tower of Nightmares stuff's better than the Queen's Jubilee. I think it's S, and Queen's Jubilee comes down to A. That makes more sense to me. Okay, I gotta say, in editing, I already disagree with this. What I forgot is all the Liadri stuff, the solo arenas. That's some of the best stuff in all of Season 1. Sure, the story might not have been so good, but I don't know, man. I kind of want to swap those back again. It's tough. Okay, so after that, now this is really weird in my timeline, in my mind, sorry. We have Fractured. So do you remember how I said people could vote at Cutthroat Politics about, you know, what Fractal was going to get added to the game? And you could also vote on, like, waypoint discounts and Black Lion Key stuff. Do you remember that? Yeah, I feel like it was forever before we saw that Fractal come out. I remember feeling like they were taking so long. And yeah, look at it listed out. It was only a couple of patches later, and these patches were coming with pretty speedy regularity. I don't know. I think my expectations have shifted so much at this point now. You know, when I look at patch cadence these days, because they do bigger patches now, but much more infrequent. So time feels like you see it flow a bit different, I suppose. Anyway, so this was the Thormanova Fractal. I actually remember. To sort of reflect on some of my misgivings at the time, I voted on the Thormanova Fractal because I was really scared that they wouldn't be able to do the Abaddon one that well. They ended up tying Scarlet into the story with the Inquest and stuff there, which I think ticked some people off. I'm actually much happier they managed to do that than tying Scarlet into some kind of Abaddon story. But I really like what they did with the vote. I don't view this as a bad patch. Some people say, oh, it's a bad patch because we never got the right Fractal or whatever. But I think it was all pretty much fine, par for the course. It wasn't one of my favorite releases, I have to be honest. I'm probably going to drop it down to B. But I do respect that it was an update to the Fractals. It was some endgame stuff. They did some interesting community initiatives. And, you know, they're really good meaty patches in terms of art and new stuff to do. Next, we have The Nightmare is Over. So this is a really weird release, okay? This is actually one of the weirdest releases because this is actually a Christmas patch. We were in summer a minute ago. We've moved all the way to Christmas now. So this is a Winter's Day release. Like, if you go on the wiki to read about this patch, it's just going to show you Winter's Day 2013. This is the second Winter's Day they added. And I can't credit all the Winter's Day stuff. What happened here, if I remember right, is that Season 1 had started going on breaks, and this was like quite a big break as they were building to something that would happen in the new year. So these were basically just some little instances reflecting on the end of the Tower of Nightmares story. And there wasn't much. I actually remember not liking this very much. And I can hardly even remember the details that happened there. I think it was just some little stuff at the dead end bar. Maybe I'm misremembering that. In fact, hold on, let me edit this. I'm going to quickly look at the wiki. Oh yeah, well, would you look at that? I'm being a little bit unfair to this. I think this was I think the final boss, the Tower of Nightmares was a triple release. And I think the final boss was just given out in Winter's Day. So there was one instance and then a little recap. I still don't think it was the greatest of patches. And we're a bit cluttered around B, aren't we, right now? So let's drop these down here like this. These two go into C. Does that make sense? Okay, so what you guys need to understand now, and this might be some interesting trivia for you, is over Christmas, they had 100% planned everything they wanted to do to end Season 1. They knew that it wasn't working at this point. They'd given it a whole year and then some. And what they wanted to do was try a new format. Season 2 was on their minds. Now, why do I know this? Because around this Christmas, before this Christmas, the partner program had kicked up. There were just like a couple of us in it. Me and Matt were in it. And I had a phone call with some of the devs, just me, Matt, and them. And they explained to us everything that was going to happen at the end of the Season 1 story. And how that was going to segue into Season 2. I can't remember if they had planned an expansion at that point. I can't remember if I was privy to that information. So if you go back on YouTube, I stopped basically covering because I knew sort of what was going on. And I couldn't really do coverage very well, so it was a weird time for me as a YouTuber. And since then, I haven't taken those opportunities if I can avoid it. I mean, at certain times, Path of Fire Press. Anyway, that's sort of off topic here. So these were quite interesting releases because they really were some of the highest quality Season 1 things because they really knew where they were going and what they wanted to do. It started with the Origins of Madness. So this was a pretty big release in which we got to go to a secret lair beneath the Dermond Priory and learn a little bit more about Scarlet. I believe this also is the Marionette patch. This is also the Triple Trouble patch, which I got really captured by. And at this point in the game, I ended up finding a whole new community of a bunch of new people as we were running Triple Trouble. This patch I probably played with the most enthusiasm of any of them. Oh, by the way, one of these patches had the Tequatl Rising was out here somewhere when they rebuilt Tequatl. That was at the year anniversary. That must have been around Dragon Bash then, I guess. Anyway, this patch, the Origin of Madness, was brilliant. This was also when all those thumpers appeared around the world, and they started hinting about ley lines and that something big was ultimately going to happen at Lion's Arch. So everything was lining up here, and this was really genuinely very cool. I also remember this was around when WildStar Press was picking up, and they were making WildStar, and they learned about telegraphs from WildStar at that time. My memories are very clear of the Origins of Madness. It's definitely S. It's actually... For me personally, I think it might be... Well, no, the story didn't do as much. I'm going to put it in S, but I'm going to put it there. Following the Origins of Madness was the Edge of the Mists release, which did have a little bit of story. I remember Timey and Bram being in the Mists. But I don't really remember the particulars of why we were there. The Aether Blades are obviously in the Mists at this point, doing things. And, you know, Edge of the Mist is weird. I actually love Edge of the Mist. I really like it. I think it's a very cool map with a lot of interesting nuance and stuff to it. But, you know... Your bog standard World versus Worlder doesn't like it much because it's not about Zerg v Zerg combat. The siege is more involved. But I think breaking bridges and the mega cannons, all the unique objectives, this is such a cool map to me. I remember them doing some betas around this, and there was a whole load of data mining, interesting stuff going on there. I like the Edge of the Mist as a map. I think it was a cool feature in the game, but the fact is it's a dead area of the game. The community never took to it. I haven't been able to play it that much. And the story didn't do much, so... this is going to suck to rate this down. I really like the Edge of the Mist. It's my tier list. I'm putting the Edge of the Mist at B. We'll put it at the bottom of B. I like the Edge of the Mist, damn it. And so after the Edge of the Mist, which kind of felt like a little bit of a break, we get into the epic conclusion, which was another triple patch. Now, I know I said the Tower of Nightmares was kind of only a triple patch because they segued the last boss. This one was kind of always meant to be. So... we find out what the Thumpers are doing. There's a ley line beneath Lion's Arch. The first of the releases was Escape from Lion's Arch, in which we escort a bunch of NPCs out. The toxins flow in and so on. They bring together the three factions. Everything starts folding together. I think it was pretty reasonable. It was okay. Then there was the Battle for Lion's Arch, which was way better. This is when we re-attack. Oh, and by the way, after Escape from Lion's Arch happened, do you guys remember the Vigil Keep was like a mini LA for a while? I think that was all cool. And all the disaster relief areas and medic tents all around. There's good parts of the patch. But finally, we get to reclaim Lion's Arch. We have a really badass meta. Basically, every type of creature we've seen through the whole season is there. We board the Breachmaker. They do some actual good mocap cutscenes. They reveal to us the Elder Dragons are back in the story, with Morgemoth opening his eye with a really beautiful cinematic. I mean, this is great. The Battle for Lion's Arch is one of the best releases ever. So do you remember a second ago I said, oh, I'd put you in the Tower of Nightmares? Maybe I'd put you in the Battle for Lion's Arch stuff, you know, the epic conclusion. This might get rated down for some of you guys because this is also when they destroyed Lion's Arch. And throughout all of Season 2 and the next year of the game's development, LA was just a wreck. And maybe you miss old LA. I don't feel too bad about it though, because I remember the bad frame rates in old LA. And I also feel like old LA's still there, it's just in the personal story. And if they fixed up the personal story and made it valuable, then you'd still be able to explore it even here in 2021. So I don't know whether I'm really that upset about it personally. And then we have Battle for Lion's Arch Aftermath, which I remember absolutely nothing about. I guess this was this the recap in the Dead End Bar? I don't know. I can't really remember anything about that. We're going to drop that down to like C, somewhere around there. So that's basically Season 1. After this, they went on break. They came back with Season 2. which had all of its stuff that you can actually play. And we go to new maps and Dry Top and the Silver Waste, and is actually genuinely a much better season, I think, overall. Also brings the Zephyrite back and segues us into Heart of Thorns. There is one other little release, though. Wiki kind of listed this out, so I thought I'd put it on the tier list too. That's Remembering Scarlet's War. This is what Season 1 is nowadays. It's just a cutscene. I hate this patch. I'm putting it to the bottom. It's the bottom of D. This is rubbish. If this wasn't here, maybe they would have had a bit more get up and go to fix this. This is the equivalent of a plaster on a gunshot wound. I do not like this release. I mean, it's a nice cutscene, all right? I can respect the effort that went in and they put something out there. But, yeah, I don't know. Maybe this thing's taking the flack for something that's much more systemic and bigger than the release itself. But I hate it, and I'm putting it to the bottom. I don't like the current recap for Season 1. It's not adequate to explain all this lovely stuff. So there you have it, guys. That's my memories of Season 1. I might have been a bit generous. There might be too many things in the S tier here. Alright, fine. I'll drop Tower of Nightmares down. And I'm going to move the Bazaar of the Four Winds over. And I'm going to move Battle for Lion's Arch left. Yeah, Battle for Lion's Arch. No, Origins of Madness. Origins of Madness. Marionette, Triple Trouble, Scarlet's Lair and all that stuff. Brilliant stuff. Battle for Lion's Arch, Bazaar of the Four Winds. A tier. These are all such solid patches. And you'll notice, by the way, essentially, the earlier in the season, the weaker it was. The later in the season, the better it was. And it's really weird because I think Season 1 gets a terrible rep, but I view it almost as two totally different products. I really do. The back half was so good. But I guess they were breaking their balls, working their asses off, trying to get in these amazing patches out. And the reputation had already landed. And it was hard to sort of regain people by that point. Because it was a long time after launch when we're dealing with the second half of Season 1 at this point. And we still weren't really getting a clear sense of where we were going. I think the whole thing probably jumped the gun on Morgemoth, and we should have been dealing with Jawmag back then or something, and it should have stayed with the pact, but hey, I'm just repeating myself. There you go, guys. That's my tier list for Living World Season 1. I could, of course, do this for Season 2. There's less releases there. There's only 6. We could go on. So if you guys want to see that, you know, make it known. I'll see how well this video does, and we'll continue along. I'm still enjoying doing these. Thank you very much, guys, for watching. Much appreciated. Give me your ideas on Season 1, and I'll see you next time very soon. Take care now, guys. Do you guys think my method of ranking is a bit wrong? I feel like more should be towards C, less should be at B, very few at A, and only like one S. I don't know. I'm basically just comparing releases, not properly ranking.